Welcome to Build Initiative's first webinar in a series on refugee experiences of relocation. My name is Danielle Fuentes-Johnson. I'm Special Projects Manager at the Build Initiative. As we get started, please feel free to place your name and location in the chat box. As the war in Ukraine is currently entering its 6th month, its adverse effects on a nation of children become more deeply rooted, and we're reminded that Ukrainian children, many of whom have been forced to flee with their families, are not the first to suffer this fate. In 2020, worldwide, close to half the refugees and asylum seekers forcibly displaced from their own countries were children. But upon arrival to this country, many refugees of color are soon faced with the additional burdens of inequitable, racist, and anti-Black immigration and refugee policies and national sentiment. And they then realize that this country may not provide the solution to their problems. We're presenting this webinar series not only to highlight for early childhood systems the experiences of many refugee families and young children in the United States and how racism continues to traumatize immigrants and refugees long after their arrival, but to offer practical strategies from individuals who have experienced resettlement and those who are supporting refugee families and young children in an equitable way. Throughout this series, we'll meet early childhood professionals who have lived the refugee and asylee experience, as well as those who are working to support these communities, and will present strategies that build on refugee and immigrant strength and resilience. Our hope is that you'll leave these sessions considering how you can use your influence and leadership to make a positive impact for refugee families and young children, regardless of their country of origin, religion, or color. Let's take a look at the agenda. We're going to welcome everyone today. We're going to take a look at defining the issues that we're talking about. And then we're going to invite our panelists to share their experiences of relocation. And then we'll talk about next steps. Let's meet our panelists on the next slide. What families and young children experience prior to resettlement in the United States is often misunderstood by the public and/or misrepresented by the media. In this first webinar of the series, we're honored to have with us early childhood professionals from around the world to share with us their insights and expertise. Today, our speakers include Deborah Young, Emtanan Busari, Fatima Jafar, Rasha Al-Shakshir, and Soad Al-Taib. On our next slide, let's go ahead to the next slide and set the stage. As we begin, we want to take a moment to review how BUILD includes refugee families and young children in our work and our vision towards creating more just, inclusive, and equitable early childhood systems to ensure more promising futures for young children. First, we believe that refugee families and young children are an asset to their communities as they bring a variety of valuable lived experiences, knowledge, cultural and linguistic diversity, strength, and resilience. Second, that systemic racism, anti-Blackness, colorism, and anti-Muslim sentiment are the basis for the myths, many of the myths and misconceptions that permeate public perception and continue to influence policy and national sentiment. Thirdly, that strategies and system components supporting refugee families must be in place and coordinated to respond to their diverse needs and meet the needs of each and every child. On the next slide, we'll take a look at numbers 4 and 5. That to be effective and culturally responsive, strategies for working with families and young children must be informed by, created in partnership with them, including them in key decision-making. And then lastly, that strategies and system components for refugee families and young children must support and maintain home language and culture in order for children to thrive. So next, let's take a look and define some issues that we're talking about. And before we get into that, I want to ask the audience, go ahead and take a moment and just close your eyes. And when you hear the word refugee, what does the person or people you envision look like? Where are they coming from? And what's your first reaction to that term? If you can, if you're so moved, go ahead and put your reaction or what came to mind in the chat box. Give everyone just a second. So as you hold that thought and that picture in your mind, let's go ahead and define some of the terms that we're going to be using throughout the session. The first term we'll be using is refugee. And these are individuals who have to leave their country of origin because of persecution, conflict, violence, or other serious disturbances to the public order. Right now, we are all aware of the news and individuals coming from Ukraine. We also have large groups of individuals coming from the Congo, Burma, Syria, and many other parts of the world. Asylum seekers are those whose request for sanctuary has yet to be processed. Currently, the largest group seeking asylum in the United States are China, Venezuela, and El Salvador. Internally displaced people are located throughout the world and, unlike refugees, are on the run in their home country. Also of note, as we talk about these terms and we familiarize ourselves with these terms and definitions, we want to remember that refugees, asylum seekers, and internally displaced people, even when from the same country, are not monolithic, and they arrive in the refugee camps, and then in the United States from various socioeconomic, educational, religious, cultural, and linguistic backgrounds, and having had different experiences of resettlement process. So let's talk about what a refugee camp is on the next slide. Refugee camps are temporary facilities built to provide immediate protection and assistance to people who have been forced to leave their home. They're not intended to be permanent solutions. They are meant to have very basic immediate needs such as food, water, shelter, and medical treatment. Now I'd like to invite one of our panelists. Saad, would you be able to introduce yourself and help us understand what happens when a family first arrives at a refugee camp by giving us a brief overview?
Yes, my name is Suad Altar. I was a refugee. I moved from my country after the war. 2003 from Iraq, and I fled to a different country. What it looked like to arrive refugee camp. First of all, when I moved, I was me and my husband. We did not have nothing. Imagine just pick up whatever you can and leave because it was not safe to stay. So what we were able to manage to get is a backpack with just some clothing in it, and our ID. I don't remember even we had a phone, around that time. And even like if lucky to have his phone, because we crossed the borders, the phone does not work. So we couldn't, no one will know if we are alive or not. Then of course the itself, it was like just a small tent. Families live in that tent, no water, nothing. So does not basic needs for a human. And of course that like it's supposed to be temporary, but believe it or not, people spend 20 to 25 years in this kind of condition, no safety. And as a refugee and now working with a lot of resettlements, I've been told from a lot of camps, from this island in Australia to the one in Iraq, that they experience human trafficking. And imagine how that looked like. Countries are not welcome. So for myself, what happened, I lived in that temporary tent for 6 days. And my husband was able to call some of his relatives that he managed to the country, which was Jordan, and we moved from that camp a different, what it's called, it's like an apartment, but it's the apartment that we imagine here in the United States. It's four walls with a cold water and a toilet, and I lived in this apartment for 8 where I had my 2 children.
Thank you, Soad, for helping us get a bit of a better understanding of what that initial experience is like for young families. On the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about some of the largest camps and where they're located. As we see, some of the largest camps around the world are located in Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda in Africa, Bangladesh and Pakistan in Asia, and Jordan in the Middle East. And as Soad mentioned, the potential length of time can vary depending on the crisis, as long as 25 years, but some of the camps have been operating far longer than that. And as we see, the Cooper's camp in West Bengali, India, and the Asghar camp in West Bank have been operating for 3/4 of a century at this point. Today, we are honored to have with us Rasha, who has firsthand knowledge of the Asghar camp. Rasha, can you introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining from and help us better understand the conditions in the Asghar camp and specifically what life is like for young children and their families in one of the oldest refugee camps in the world? While you're talking, we'll put up the pictures, some pictures of the camp so you can get a description as you're telling us.
All right. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us in this webinar. I'm Rashad Shakhshir. I'm Palestinian, and I work as an instructor in Najah National University, and I work also in early childhood in the Palestinian Child Institute as well. Well, I could tell lots of stories because I've been into those camps a lot. Actually, maybe the the Palestinian refugee stories probably are the longest because in over 75 years since 1948. Especially, I'm going to talk about the camps in Nablus, where I'm talking from today. There are almost like 19 camps all over the West Bank. But in Nablus, there are 3 main camps. The Askar, Balata, and camp number 1. And you can see from the picture how it's overcrowded and how the shape of and the structure of this camp is like different from the pictures like previously shown. Those camps established in 1950s, and they are frequently under the threat of the Israeli occupational acts. And I say Israeli occupational acts, I mean damage, arrests, threats of life. The camp, relatively smallest camps in the world, however, they are the most population. You could see the camp, the area of the camp, it's limited, doesn't extend. So there's no other way but building up. So as you can see how narrow the path, and in real life, you can't just walk like normal, you need to walk side, way to get through. It's, as I said, it's overcrowded. There's a lack of main living services. There's like limited spaces, and obviously there's no privacy. And you can see and you can tell how negatively impact the mental and physical health of the children, because there's like limited space for play. Imagine like where the magic happens when children play and have their imagination grow, and they grow in holistic way. But unfortunately, there's no sustainable spaces for children to play there. There's like most in all the camps, there are at least 1 or 2 schools serve those camps because they are all related to UNRWA to get fund of, and usually 1 health center for all purposes. So it must be like really difficult because each camp, it has around 7,000 people in a very limited space. And when I went, and Debbie like accompanied me many times to the camps, And we heard so many stories and testimonies from parents and children themselves, how they aspire for more educational opportunity, and they aspire to even be out of the camp. And the only one limited solution to go out of the camp is by getting a higher education and get job outside those camps. But yeah, sometimes they're like really limited chances, and it's like always connected to the political fund at this time that support those chances, and about what opportunities sometimes those projects can help, but it's not sustainable. And I think it's the most and felt part that the children and the parents are in constant threats by the Israeli, threats, which put them in a very vulnerable situations when they face very mental and stress and anxiety disorders, which hinder their growth. So you can tell, and those, images is not giving the real situation, it's justice, because obviously there's a part where they're all aspire for better future, but the reality, like, they need to find solution, and one of the solution, unfortunately, that they seeking to immigrate outside, and one of the destination is USA. So this is like a little part of this experience, and as I said, they're inside Palestine, there are 19 camps with different issues, with different level of, let's say, exposing to the difficulties, whether with occupation side, or with the funds, or with the education part, or getting services, because the mental services also can be difficult to reach, and there's like a stigma to access it. So just a brief probably talk to describe the refugee status in those camps, what the Palestinians face.
Thank you, Rasha, for giving us a glimpse into one of the oldest camps. And I'd also like to invite Deborah. Deborah, could you introduce yourself and share a little bit about what you have seen in visiting different refugee camps around the world, including this camp, in terms of the young children, the effect on young children especially?
Yes, thank you. My name is Deborah Young, and I work for Empowering Communities Globally for the Care of Children. And we've been working in conflict areas for 2 to 3 decades now. And some of the things that we see with young children is, as both of Sawad and Rasha have alluded to, is that the play areas and the focus on young children. So much of the time and focus for young children and families is, and not to minimize, the potable water. Is there sufficient calorie intake? Those kinds of things, and they're very important. But we also know holistically that mental health and parenting and positive shared emotional interactions are really key to well-being and health. A lot of times funding and programs will go to the youth. They're louder, they're more noticed, and they need it as well. Who speaks for the little children? Who speaks for the mom and the baby when you're living in such conditions, on how to have those moments of joy during the day? We all need moments of joy. And I feel my work with Rasha and others in several camps, there's very little intention or attention to those moments of joy.
Thank you, Sawad and Rasha and Deborah, for giving us a little glimpse. Just, there's so much to unpack. We could spend an hour on just each part of these topics. So we appreciate setting the stage a little bit about what happens prior to arrival in the United States. So Until 1980, the United States was the world's top country for refugee admissions. Beginning in 1980, the United States government moved away from an ad hoc approach to the permanent standardized system for identifying, vetting, and resettling prospective refugees that's still in place today. So on this slide, you get just a snapshot of what resettlement has looked like in the past few years. Annually, since the start of the program in 1980, when more than 200,000 refugees were provided and resettled in the United States, until last year, where approximately just over 11,000 were resettled. So depending on political climate, it has meant that entire nations have been barred, either temporarily or permanently. And we see in 2021, the number of admissions, the ceiling was raised to 125, with the majority of those individuals coming from Africa and Southeast Asia. And then, as we've seen on the news, in March of 2022, the current administration announced that the United States would recognize or welcome up to 100,000 Ukrainians. Just a quick snapshot. So let's take a look at what this looks like on a statewide basis on the next slide. Since 2010, the United States has resettled approximately 600,000 refugees, and these 12 states have received more than half. This, again, like everything we're discussing here, is just a snapshot of a moment. These are ever-changing numbers and ever-changing populations. If you can, place in the chat box the state you're from and the refugee communities you either belong to, work with, and or know about in your community. Take just a second. Right. Well, as we'll see on the next slide, we'll get into hearing from our panelists a little more. But on next slide, we're going to take a look and to briefly look at how the US media informs the public on refugee issues and the national climate into which newly resettled families and young children are entering. As we look at the headlines on this page, or this slide, and the next slide, it illuminates the double standards for entry into the United States, the favoritism for those who are white, dominantly Christian, and politically aligned. And it begs the question of why some groups are deemed more worthy than others to receive media attention and ultimately receive refugee status and support. It also shows us how quickly refugee communities are forgotten in the rapid news cycle. We are, as a nation, understandably concerned with the fate of Ukrainian children and families, we are encouraging the same consideration in the media, policy, and implementation for other refugees and those seeking asylum. Now I'd like to invite our panelists to share with us some of their experiences of arriving in the United States as a refugee or an asylee. Emtanan, Fatima, and Soad, I really, again, honored to have you here with us. I was wondering, Emtanan and Fatima, we heard a little bit about Soad a few minutes ago. Would you be willing to introduce yourselves, please?
Hello, my name is Fatima Jafari. I'm from Afghanistan. I have been in United States since 6 years ago, and I live family. I have my husband worked with the army force in Afghanistan. He was a translator, and he got the special immigrant visa because his was in the danger. We immigrant to United States, and when we came to United States, boy, and now I have 2 kids. And when I stayed, my English was very, very low, and scared about my life, new life in the United States. And for me, how can communicate with the people, how can live here, how can life was safe. But when we think about our family, Afghanistan, after the Taliban took the Afghanistan, our family is in danger. And before I married, I lived with my family, and my father just moved to Australia because my brother was sick and he had disease. And just think about that. My father hasn't the visa to come back, and because my brother is died, and we are separate all of the world. My father with my one brother live in Australia, me in United States, and sorry.
Thank
And
you.
my another brother lived in Finland, and from each other, my mother with another brother lives in Iran. We forced to move because we are under, and many people in the state now, they haven't any visa, and they are my heart is sorry.
Thank you, Fatima, for sharing such painful memories and reality, and helping the audience understand the ongoing effects that this process has on families.
Yes, and now some of my husband friends came to, they haven't any visa. They are on the court between SIV, asylum or refugee. And one of the women's single mom, her husband killed by Taliban too, and now she is scared, and she's on the court too between SIV, asylum or refugee, because her husband working army, U.S. Army. Now she's here, but she is scared about here what kind of visa she will. As I get the SIV visa, I live here. Everything was good for me because we got the blood test, we got the biometric, we got visa. They scared about their life. They scared about children. How can manage everything, and they have benefit. They have benefit just for 6 months and food stamp and everything. But now it's 6 months is done. She need to go, and but she hasn't. She doesn't know how can go to work, and what happened for the children if she go to the work, because for children, and it is so hard for her. She is scared about. She's so nervous. My friends, she has visa for the study, scholarship, and came from Afghanistan here for a study, but now she cannot go back to Afghanistan because she's in the danger. And she brought her husband with her visa, but her husband is asylum now. They haven't anything like social security. They need to go to work because they haven't any benefit like the other people, like food stamp, get money. They haven't anything, and they need to make money to follow their living here. and it is so hard.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fatma, for sharing that. Deborah, I'm wondering if you could take a second and explain for the audience the difference between services provided for refugee families and asylees. And we'll go back to our panelists.
Absolutely. So thank you, Fatima. And just mentioning, Colorado's received about 2,200, 300 newcomers from Afghanistan in the past 6 months. And Fatima sharing stories that are common, unfortunately. They're shared by many. In January, we were called by the state to see if we could help support the women. Some of the women were fearful coming out of their rooms. Everything is new, and language barriers, cultural barriers, and fear, right? We've just been separated from their families. They don't know how their families are doing in Afghanistan. Some are out, some are in other countries, as she had mentioned. And the resettlement agencies are overworked and underfunded, as many of us are. And so they are really trying to attend to make sure people have food stamps, they're getting apartments, they're getting on Medicaid, all these things logistically that are needed. And at the same time, we're humans and people, and we need pauses and we need time to reflect. And they called to see if the Pamoja Afghan women would be willing to work. And I had said, absolutely. And how much money do you have to pay them? And they wanted to be volunteers. And I just wanted to voice that people who are coming over as refugees and immigrants, and then we ask them to volunteer when they are already being put in the lowest paying jobs, we need to rethink that. So we did find a donor to fund the women, and they reached out to over 95 women who were coming in and just making friends and talking. And the number one thing that came up is parenting and having a space to talk about families back home with people who understood. And we don't use parenting classes. We're not talking about those kinds of things. One story I just really quickly want to share is a woman had come. Her husband died 2 years ago, worked for the US military, and she came over, and as they were saying, they don't know if she should be an SIV because it was really her husband worked, or should she be an asylee. Regardless, they gave her an apartment in April. She has 6 months to find a job and start paying her own apartment. May, we had a snowstorm. Her son had an asthma attack. She called a case manager. They said you could call 911 if it's an emergency, or go to the university hospital to pick up the meds. She didn't even know what 911 emergency meant. What does that mean? How does that go? So she decided to go to the university hospital. She has 4 children, single mom. 2 of them are in school. The 2 and a 4-year-old are at home. Snowstorm. She didn't want to take them outside. So she put them in. She said, do not open this door. No matter what, I need to go get the medicine for your brother. And they had a special word. So if somebody did come and gave the special word, they know that they were going to take her to mom. She goes out onto the street and she gets hit by a car, breaks her ankle, breaks her tibia. Police come, ambulance come, take them to the hospital, trying to get the children. The police are at the door. The 4-year-old would not open that door. Finally, he got the password from the mom. They open the door, and she gets a ticket for child abuse and not obeying traffic signs. Right. And so it's like, where is the humanism in our systems to actually help the transition into resettlement? And do people really understand what that means? Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. I appreciate it. And I would like to ask this of the panel and anyone who feels able to share. What types of services would have made a difference, or what type of approach would have made the process easier? What do you hear from the families that you work with?
So I can answer that, but I want to add just one thing. When I moved here, I was speaking some English, but that did not the isolation. I moved here, I couldn't find any community that support me. At the same time, you know how I was in a camp for 8 years. I was dreaming about, coming a country that I will achieve my dreams. And I thought about, United States as, beautiful house. And that was my dream. Here to a small apartment. And it's not healthy living. Neighborhood was not safe for my children to go outside and play. And, inside my apartment, I had roaches and I had mice. Imagine how that. Now I agree with Ms. Deborah that resettlement agency, they are in their best. And of course, it's like the resources are limited. Now, to make it different, I will think about you as my, U.S. community to support us as, newcomers that we live the dream of having a country. We did not have that. I did not have that. As a woman who is, I did not have an ID. I did not feel the belonging. I wanted that belonging. I wanted the community to have me, support system for everyone, me, who came, from that trauma, to provide that trauma to make it, a little bit ease for these parents who came from these trauma. Someone like who can understand the culture, understand understand the language. This will make it more easier for us to adapt the new culture. If you ask me, I will really appreciate if that happened for new families that they come here, wanted to feel that this is their, that we can build, we can raise our children, we see the future of our.
Thank you, Saad. The importance of feeling welcome, having someone who speaks your language cannot be underestimated. Emtanan, please join us.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Emtinan Al-Busairi. I'm a student in the University of Colorado Springs in special education. I have a friend who know that I was interested in early childhood development. She told me about the Pamoja program, which was designed to help women who have had no training, no English or little English, or any marketable skill, to begin a course of training that will help them reach out their goals. I started with the Pamoja program to take courses in child brain development. Then I discovered that my daughter had delayed development, and it made me seek more information in this field uh, of, of causes of delay or delayed development in children. And the Pamoja program showed me how to find this measure or in special education program, and how to meet the entrance requirements based on my English classes and my diplomas from evaluated my diploma in my country. I found that it is very important to educate parents about the development their children and ways to deal with these problems, because early intervention is the key for helping most children. When the children find early care and therapy like speech therapy, occupational therapy, or physical therapy, that is when these treatments are most effective. I got support in the field in language and evaluation, my diplomas also from Pamoja until I reached here now. I'm now striving to help and go deeper in this field or in the field of educating children with disability and helping them to become contributing members of a society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emtanan. We know the audience that's here with us today, we all know and understand the importance of having experts, early childhood experts who speak the language, look like the children, come from the communities the children come from, and know where the children are coming from, the importance of that in a child's life. And so I want to ask the three of you and open it to have Deborah join us as well. As early childhood professionals that you all are, as you've entered the workforce, the early childhood workforce, what has the reception been like? What have been some, as they say, wins, some challenges? And what would you like the systems leaders to know that are on the call and the audience to know about your journey as early childhood professionals? I'll open that to anyone that wants to jump in.
I guess I will start. Now, I was a teacher back home. And when I moved here, of course, because I fled my country, so I did not have any documents to support. I started as a teacher assistant in a childcare. It took me years because I don't have my BA in early, and I couldn't bring it to start and build up and go to school. Finally, I will graduate this next semester with a bachelor's degree in education. As well, I am trying to, take a lot of training to support my skills so I can help my community. And we try to help with, with the program. When we first started the program, it was so difficult because a lot of women in our community, first of all, they did not have the literature skills. It was online. And then they were like, oh, what about the language? We do not speak English. But then, of course, because they were able to hire interpreters, and I am one of them, to help with the interpreting for the class. Then, of course, help them with, just anything else, set up documentation and, even understand the process was like difficult for these immigrants. This is something this is one of the barriers. Of course, like Imtinan said, a lot of we have degree already, and we are intelligence. The problem with that connection between I am intelligence and I am smart, I am educated, but this don't have language, and the language is the power here. So the connection between two, I don't think that's something like if I don't speak, I speak, and I have the Arabic language. This is it. It's not. I need to speak the English language to prove that I have the education, the proper education. That's a barrier here. We have a lot of women that they have the degree because of the war, because they flee their country, they do not have that. The other thing, of course, when we moved here, we needed to find a job to support our families. These jobs, they pay the minimum wages for us, and sometimes to support women in our community, we need to work as volunteers. And our time, and I don't know, like, okay, how can we work? How can we support our communities? How can we go to school? All this is a barrier. I will mention one example. As I, but what happened is me and my husband, we went to a grocery store, and it was like at 8 o'clock, so it was very late. So this guy, and he came and he ran to us, and he was like, hey, can you help me? And I was looking at him, and I recognized that he's Middle Eastern. But the thing that's, who are you? What do you need? Then he was like, I moved here and I don't have nothing. We came to get groceries and things. There's that thing that he did not know how to take the bus, how to go to his house, how to get the education, register for schooling. All these are barriers for our newcomers. For the early, it's even worse, because when I will take my child to a school, a place for a child that he does not know the language, he does not know the culture, not know the community, to take him to a place like not seeing himself in it, that's another barrier. So for myself, I will love to see that changes happening in our system, in our early childhood system, because we are professional here in early education. Let's start with that. Let's start to think, how can we incorporate these new and use their skills and knowledge in supporting them. That's how I think about it. And hopefully that will happen.
Thank you, Sawad. Emtinan, please join us.
Yeah, I want to add something with Suad. That's about the Pamoja program for educating refugee and setting their first step. It's very important for their integration into society. Some of women friends here in Colorado, first before getting to know Pamoja, were wishing for work, but they didn't know. They didn't know where their route would be with support and education in how to register, how to use computer, then take the computer classes and language changed their life. Now they are completely self-reliant, and they can work and grow and are very happy. I think that the first concern to every refugee here is where to start. But by taking their hands and guiding them to the right place, they will be able to achieve their goals and engage in society. Thank you.
Well, all of you, I want to thank you so much. We appreciate your generosity in sharing painful memories, the experiences and insights that you have shared with us. And we know that we are only scratching the surface of what you have to share with us and teach us. So I thank you, all three of you, and Rasha as well, for sharing just this introduction to this topic. Deborah, I'd like to ask, as a longtime advocate, ally, and activist for refugee families and young children around the world, could you share with us your recommendations on the next slide that states and community systems leaders should be considering when trying to better support resettled families and young children?
Yes, thank you very much. So I want to preface that if we want to learn more and more about this, we need to have refugees and immigrants sitting at the table informing us. They're the ones with the PhD in refugee and immigrants. And so many of us sitting at the table trying to make policies, figuring out what to do, have not experienced that lived experience. And so I think that's one of the first things I really want systems, institutions to, because they're all made of people, to recognize who's at the table, who's figuring this out with you. The second one is that English does not equal intelligence. That's really important. And I've heard that over and over with the women. They want to go to college. They want to enter the workforce. We all know it's very difficult to live in the US on one income, right? Both parents really do need to work. How can they get out there? And the barriers, systemic barriers for people who are emerging bi and multilingual speakers, I was amazed. I had not realized this until 2019 when we jumped in to identify some barriers and gaps in the systems. They mentioned technology, really important. We started our classes in person and then COVID hit. We had to turn to technology. People were doing their classes and their homework on a phone. And then when we got them a computer, it was like, okay, first time I'm ever touching a computer, right? So these are impacts from oppression and right, the global discrimination. And so thinking of that, what can we do to actually minimize that impact when coming to the US? So what's really important is language justice, and not just Spanish and English. We're almost creating a second dominant language. So that's important. Yes, engage all family members, right? Families come in all different kinds of configurations. And we really need to, as Sawad said, a sense of belonging, welcoming them into this country. They face so much discrimination when they walk outside of their apartment or their home. Very little is provided in parenting. Please, please, please prioritize parenting information and the laws that come around that. They are not the same. Somebody mentioned financial health, really important. We have numerous examples when they finally get their first credit card because they've been given SNAP cards and other cards that actually have money on it. They thought it was another card with lots of money and just kept spending it. And then they ended up in debt, right? So these are just hiccups that we really can avoid if we pause, have people at the table, bring attention and intention to what we're doing. Encourage home language, retention and culture. One of the biggest things we hear is when the children start entering the school, they come home and they don't talk their home language. So parent and child are already not communicating to know what is going on. And then schools are not including the parents. How many times I have gone to school as an advocate because the child is getting in trouble. They're leaving the class because the teacher doesn't understand. The child has no idea what you're saying, and they're feeling shamed and embarrassed, so they leave the class and not come back, and then they're in trouble. I mean, there's stories after stories we could share about incidences so similar to this kind of thing. Another one is cultural bridging. Please remember, bridge goes both ways. It's not about them just coming to the US. If the US is truly multicultural, then we must be multilingual. A recommendation I have is that every public school should be made to be bilingual, right? I mean, we should be multilingual, multicultural country if that's really what we say we are. Let's see. Oh, the evaluation of degrees to recognize that other people have gone to college and have other degrees in other areas. And also to recognize that degrees does not always mean intelligence and people who can make decisions and be at the table. Lived experience counts for something. I'm going to say that one more time because it's really important. Lived experience counts for something. And then when refugees and immigrants are coming over and they work so hard to find jobs, we still put them in low-paying jobs. In Colorado, we put them many times into meat packing and slaughtering businesses. Can you imagine coming from a war, already experienced so much trauma, and then going into a slaughterhouse, right? And it's low income. So how are they ever supposed to raise themselves up when we created dependency and started them in a low income bracket? And as Sawad mentioned, in an area that's typically not safe, low income, has no child care around it, resources are not readily available, they don't have transportation. So think about how holistically can we bring them into the neighborhoods where resources are, in groups, so they feel like a sense of belonging and make their way as a welcomed part of our country. They're giving us their children who are going to participate and contribute to our country for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Let's invest.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for those very concrete strategies and suggestions. Thank you to the chat. Thank you to the audience. We so appreciate you coming on this journey with us. We invite you to please join us in 2 weeks when on August 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern, we'll continue this conversation with Dr. Monica Noriega, an assistant professor at the University of California, San Francisco's Child Trauma Research Center, who works with refugee, asylee, and immigrant families predominantly from Central and South America, and will lead us in a conversation about how to support resettled families and young children through a trauma-informed approach, as well as help us identify the additional burdens, stressors, and traumas the systems they engage with in the US may have caused, as our panelists and Deborah, everyone has shared with us today. So you won't want to miss it. We ask that you take a moment when we close out the PowerPoint and our time together today to provide your thoughts on today's session in a survey, which will pop up as we close the meeting. This feedback helps us deliver a product that better meets your needs, so we thank you in advance. So once again, we want to thank you. The slides and the PowerPoint and the recording will be available with all of the resource and references and the contact for our incredible speakers and panelists today. With that, I want to thank Deborah and Emtanan, Fatima, Soad, and Rasha for joining us from around the world. Thank you so much. Gracias. We appreciate all of you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon.